Mudslides inundated homes and destroyed bridges. Power lines went down and telephone networks have been disrupted. In a restaurant in Guangdong province this week, customers gazed in horror as winds tore down trees
Seeding the
while fast
clouds.
moving sheets of rain pounded the street outside. The province is prone to summer floods. 2 years ago, it was hit with the heaviest downpours in 6 decades, with hundreds of thousands of people forced to evacuate. Coming up, the U.S. Commerce Department.
This was happening in the first place. And so for all the corporate media to kind of come out literally within 1 or 2 days of each other with articles almost across the board defending these practices came off as a bit of a shock. But let me explain. Systems to artificially induce rain, they call it cloud seeding, have come under scrutiny amid the heavy floods in the United Arab Emirates. You might have seen, for example, that large cities like Dubai, they're having record-breaking rainfall beyond recorded data, which started in about 1949. And amid this, people are saying, wow, this is a bit odd, and they're wondering whether the floods were impacted by maybe anomalies caused by maybe cloud seeding technologies that are, in fact, used very heavily in the UAE to cause rain. Now,
Yep.
you might have seen the reports from the corporate media. Basically, for the most part, they noted that cloud seeding operations to induce rain have been used for years in the UAE and also used to an extent in several parts of the United States and even other countries. But they
California.
denied that the floods in the UAE had any ties to this. The basic premise for them writing it off is that the UAE's National Center of Meteorology contacted several news outlets to tell them that they were not doing those operations during this particular rainstorm. And they claimed these storms were just, too big to be caused by this type of technology. Take it for what you will. Let me show you what some of the media were saying. This is CNN. CNN said further in, officials at the country's National Center of Meteorology have been cited as saying the rain was not caused by cloud seeding. They say CNN has reached out to the center for comment, but even if the program did fly its planes through the sky leading up to the storm, it's exceedingly unlikely the efforts would have produced more rain than was going to fall naturally. That's also kind of not true because the entire purpose of cloud seeding is to get more rain, not to just make it rain when you want to. So it's a bit of misunderstanding here, but I'll explain all of this. Now, The Guardian said this. They said, in a statement issued to multiple news outlets, so they reached out to him, the NCM, again, that meteorology agency in the UAE, they say, which oversees cloud seeding operations in the UAE, said there were no such cloud seeding operations before or during the storm. The individual in charge of it, Omar Al-Yazidi, the Deputy Director General of the MCM, said, quote, we did not engage in any seeding operations during this particular weather event. The essence of cloud seeding lies in targeting clouds at earlier stages prior to precipitation. Engaging in seeding activities during a severe thunderstorm scenario would prove futile. Now, I challenge their framing of saying before or during, because in this quote, he's saying during, but in the way they frame it, they say before as well. So I kind of wonder how they're framing it. But regardless, they say that experts, meanwhile, have debunked, they claim, the cloud seeding theory. One of them, Martin Abon, a professor of atmospheric physics and dynamics at the University of Reading, said that, quote, cloud seeding, certainly in the Emirates, is used for clouds that don't normally produce rain. You would not normally develop a very severe storm out of that. Now, I note that that's not quite absolute. There actually have been pretty serious storms caused by cloud seeding, historically documented, for example, in the UK, which I'll get into. But look, other scientists basically they spoke with claim that it could not have been caused by cloud seeding because rainfall has been getting heavier around the world because of climate change. So it's more of a climate change narrative they're going with. Others say that cloud
Naturally.
seeding cannot create clouds from nothing, so it just couldn't happen, basically. But what's even more interesting to me is that some of the initial articles actually claimed otherwise. For example, I'll show you one right now. It has since been altered. They've changed this article. First, let me show you what it currently says. If you were to go to this link, this is what you'd see from Bloomberg. Bloomberg said, Dubai grants to stand still as flooding hits city residents, bailout apartments, underground car parks flooded, rain disrupts transport systems, and closes UAE schools. And they say the floods came after one of the worst storms in decades. The government had seeded clouds in the preceding days, though meteorologists said it was unlikely that it had significant impact on the rainfall. The UAE has been carrying out seeding operations since 2002 to address water security issues, even though the lack of drainage in many areas can trigger flooding. Now, before I go deeper into this, let me just point something out. Didn't the article I showed you just a minute ago say that they did not conduct cloud seeding activities before or during the storm? But now Bloomberg is saying they actually did do it before the storm. That's kind of weird, right? They said again that they had been carrying out seeding operations since 2002, but they note that they had done this. They had, quote, right, the government, this is the exact quote, had seeded clouds in the preceding days. Does that not contradict the other reports coming out? But, back to this article and the other things with it, this article has actually been altered. We have the web archives. Let me show you what that exact same link, that exact same article used to say. This is the original one. Bloomberg, this is the original headline. Dubai grants to standstill as cloud seeding worsens flooding. Seeding planes used to take advantage of low-pressure systems. Heavy rain disrupts transport systems and closes UAE schools. And the other paragraph, the second paragraph, says this. The heavy rains that caused widespread flooding across a desert nation stemmed partly from cloud seeding. The UAE started cloud seeding operations in 2002 to address water security issues, even though the lack of drainage in many areas can trigger flooding. So they altered the article. And the article, even the current one, contradicts reporting from other media. They can't seem to make up their mind, in other words. One of the issues you have, of course, with cloud seeding is that it's a long-term program. They're doing it for years. They increased the programs seriously, massively, over the last couple years in the UAE. And if you do it right after a drought, the ground cannot properly absorb it, and you get flooding. But regardless, right? This article, the Bloomberg one, aside from contradicting, even in its current form, some of the other reporting, noting that the UAE did, in fact, conduct cloud seeding operations before this, they also changed the headline, and they changed the first bullet point below the headline that noted the impact of cloud seeding, where they said it contributed to it, i.e. it was not the sole cause. But they also changed the second paragraph and other things that explained what happened. I find this all very interesting, and frankly, it makes me really wonder why they changed it, and why all the other corporate media actually started parroting the exact same narrative within 1 day or 2 days of each other, saying that cloud seeding wasn't the cause. They all came out almost at the same time with the exact same narrative. Now, look, the way corporate media are framing this is that basically there's just a total agreement that cloud seeding was not a cause, and that anyone who says otherwise is a conspiracy theorist. But as we can see in the web archives, originally it doesn't seem they actually believed it was so far-fetched. In fact, many of them reported that was the cause, or one of the contributing causes, which means, of course, it went through a reporter, it went through an editor, and it was able to be published on the website. Emirates has systems to modify the weather in artificially induced rain, and this has come under scrutiny amid the heavy floods there. Now, first off, on the possible risk of weather modification like this, look, contrary to many claims going around right now suggesting that cloud seeding cannot lead to serious storms or floods, there actually have been cases where it's done this. In fact, people have died from it. There are still different takes on this, but it's important to note. This is actually one of the reasons why some of the experiments with this technology were canceled in the United Kingdom, because of the danger of it. The Guardian reported this way back in 2001, and they say this. On August 15th, 1952, one of the worst flash floods ever to have occurred in Britain swept through the Devon village of Lynmouth. 35 people died as a torrent of 90 million tons of water and thousands of tons of rock poured off saturated Exmoor and into the village, destroying homes, bridges, shops, and hotels. The disaster was officially termed the Hand of God. But new evidence from previously classified government files back in 2001 suggests that a team of international scientists working with the Royal Air Force, the RAF, was experimenting with artificial rainmaking in southern Britain the same week and could possibly be implicated. It notes that squadron leader Len Otley, who was working on what was known as Operation Cumulus, has told the BBC that they jokingly referred to the rainmaking exercise as Operation Witch Doctor. Now, this operation, Operation Cumulus, was put on hold indefinitely after the tragedy. It notes that declassified minutes from an Air Ministry meeting held in the War Office on November 3rd, 1953, and remember, these were declassified around 2001, show why the military were interested in increasing rain and snow by artificial means. The list of possible uses, including bogging down enemy movement, incrementing the water flow in rivers and streams to hinder or stop enemy crossings, and clearing fog from airfields. The documents also talk of rainmaking having the potential to explode an atomic weapon in a seeding storm system or cloud. This would produce a far wider area of radioactive contamination than a normal atomic explosion. But it notes further in that controversy still surrounds the efficacy of these early cloud seeding experiments. They say in 1955, questions were asked about in the Commons about the possibilities of liability and compensation claims. Documents seen by the BBC suggest that both the Air Ministry and the Treasury became very anxious and were aware that rainmaking could cause damage, not just to military targets and personnel, but also to civilians. So the government covered it up in the UK. They admitted it finally when they declassified the documents many decades later in 2001. But I would argue that if they covered it up in one country, why would you trust it in another country, especially when there's conflicting reports about them carrying out the same type of operations right before a devastating storm? So look, cloud seeding, though, has historically been known to be able to cause devastating floods. It was put on hold in the UK because of this undeniable fact. The dangers of it are known. In fact, they were talking about weaponizing it. There was talk of how to use this as a weapon of war again. So, of course, we could argue there's more rain in the UK, and so, maybe there's more risk of causing a flood if you mess with the rain clouds there. You take it as you will. But there's also the weaponization side. The ability to weaponize these types of technology is why a United Nations agreement to ban these technologies during conflicts are in place. Let me show you the actual United Nations document on this. This is the United Nations website. This is the H1 Convention on the Prohibition of Military or any other hostile use of environmental modification techniques, also known as NMOD. It says further in, the problem of artificial modification of the environment for military or other hostile purposes was brought to the international agenda in the early 1970s. In July 1974, USA and USSR agreed to hold bilateral discussions on measures to overcome the dangers of the use of environmental modification techniques for military purposes, and 3 subsequent rounds of discussions in 1974 and 1975. They note that in August of 1975, USA and USSR tabled identical draft texts of a convention of the conference at the conference of the Committee on Disarmament, the CCD, where intensive negotiations resulted in a modified text and understanding regarding 4 articles of this convention in 1976. And it should be noted, both countries were experimenting with weather modification weapons. In fact, the American system, Operation Popeye, was used in Vietnam. Now, on this, though, there are a lot of different ideas on how these technologies could be weaponized. Some of them are like what was discussed in the UK, flooding, for example, and other things. One of the ways most commonly talked about these days would be able to induce rain in one country to deny rainfall in another. Basically, you dry another country out and you make it so they don't have water. But as we mentioned earlier, there are a lot of ways it was discussed as being used as a weapon. But back to the programs overall. it should be noted that cloud seeding is actually being used in several U.S. states. Now, it's actually an older technology. It's been used for decades, but we started seeing a pretty large resurgence of its use about 8 years ago, something like that. Let me show you another piece on this. This was BBC. They said this: cloud seeding, the practice of injecting certain materials into storm cells to enhance precipitation, has drawn interest from a growing number of water-strapped countries, particularly in the past 5 years. Keep in mind this was in, again, 2016, right? Now, they say that currently around 60 countries on 5 continents are operating cloud seeding operations to enhance rainfall, mainly for reservoirs, watersheds, and agriculture. They note further that initial research in weather modification began in the late 1940s, mainly in the U.S. By the 1960s and 1970s, thanks to major funding from General Electric, cloud seeding gathered pace. But the following 2 decades saw a gradual lapse in interest and investment, a loss of confidence spurred by unrealistic claims, at least in the U.S., and in places like South Africa, Australia, and Israel, the research continued. However, only recently have efforts really started to pick up again. Again, this was 1996. They say that in 1999, 40 countries had become involved in cloud seeding operations, and randomized double-blind experiments were starting to prove that cloud seeding did in fact work. They say currently, this is in 2016, estimates for how much seeding increases the amount of rainfall range between 15 and 40%. A seeding aircraft is normally a regular twin-engine aircraft with racks mounted on the belly and wings, similar to ones which launch flares. Now, here's a more recent piece on it being picked up in different parts of the U.S. This is Scientific American from a few years ago, 2021. They say cloud seeding is a real practice. This is Scientific American, folks. They say, in fact, it's been around for decades. It's used today to boost precipitation in at least 8 states across the western U.S. and dozens of countries around the world. Interest in cloud seeding is growing as temperatures steadily rise. They go with the global warming narrative, right? As temperatures steadily rise, increasing drought risks in places like the Mountain West. But there's a catch. Scientists aren't sure how well cloud seeding works today, let alone in a warmer climate. They don't really fully know what they're doing, in other words. And they note as well that cloud seeding can take a few different forms. In some places, it's used to boost rainfall or prevent hailstorms. But in the U.S., in the United States, it most commonly aims to enhance snowfall, and usually with silver iodide. Now, back to what's happening in the United Arab Emirates, because again, we're talking about these floods there and so on, and rumors that cloud seeding might have contributed to this. They've been doing cloud seeding for a fairly long time, and they significantly increased these types of operations over the last few years. This is Vice in 2021. They say the UAE, the United Arab Emirates, has maintained a federally funded research center devoted to studying cloud seeding in an effort to improve water security since the 1990s. In 2019, the UAE conducted at least 185 cloud seeding operations, widely reported at the time. The end of the year saw torrential downpours and flooding that blocked traffic in streets, neighborhoods, and malls. And people at the time were, of course, blaming that on cloud seeding, but they, of course, denied it. A spokesperson says for the UAE NCM denied that it created the flood conditions to Wired at the time. Same old story, flooding, hey, we didn't do it. Okay, they take it at the word, basically. Now, it says that according to Gulf Today, the MCM has carried out 126 cloud seeding flights in 2021 so far, including 14 flights since last Tuesday, they say. Meaning, again, almost half the year they're carrying these out. Now, it should be noted as well that the CCP's, the Chinese Communist Party's Science and Technology Group in China, is actually involved in doing the research on cloud seeding operations in the UAE. And they were actually saying back in 2021 that they don't fully understand it. They don't really know what they're doing. They're researching, they're experimenting with it. And so this raises some questions on, well, how do they know they're not causing disasters, frankly? Here's one of the CCP researchers talking about this. This is from the national news in the UAE in 2022, and they said this, quote, "Cloud seeding is a very complicated operation that needs a lot of scientific investigation to really understand the fundamentals of," said Lulin Shui, chief scientist at the Huaxin Chuangzi Science and Technology Research Group in China, who is carrying out research on cloud seeding in the UAE. And the individual says, quote, "Especially for the convective cloud formed by the process of warmer air rising, the cloud itself is very dynamic, which means if you change certain things of the cloud, it can have consequences that are very complicated to understand, and using observation itself, it's very difficult to quantify these effects." In other words, the clouds there are complicated. They don't really know what they're doing. They're trying to measure, they're trying to figure it out. They're doing all these experiments, but they don't fully grasp what the heck they're doing. And notice that one of the major problems, Mr. Lulin said, is that no two clouds are the same, and then notes further in fact, the whole process can backfire, meaning less rain would fall than would otherwise have occurred if there had been no intervention, for example.
That's why
They
they did
note
it.
scientists are
Put it in
working on
China,
complicated computer simulations to better understand the optimum intervention for different cloud types. However, they are unsure they will ever fully master cloud seeding, not least because they have no way of knowing how much extra rain they have helped produce, which calls into question the entire narrative of whether they actually think that these things might have caused an effect, because they have no way of knowing how much extra rain they may have helped produce, as again they were stating in their own media back in 2021. And Mr. Lulin said that the UAE has particularly, quote, "complicated clouds." In other words, even though they're experimenting with this in a lot of areas, the UAE is unique in that it's more difficult there and more unpredictable there than most other places. But look, on one part, the CCP is involved in the cloud seeding programs in the UAE, and it doesn't sound like they have a really good grasp on what the heck they're doing or how to measure the effects even. But regardless, they were increasing the programs. They were, over the past few years, hugely increasing, in fact. Well,
I'm Jonathan Lawson. If you're 50 to 85, I have an important message about security. Write down the number on your screen so you can call when I finish. The lock I want to talk to you about isn't the one on your door. This is a lock for your life insurance, a rate lock that guarantees that once you're insured, your rate can never go up at any time for any reason. But be careful. Many policies you see do not have one, but you can get a lifetime rate lock from Colonial Penn. Call this number to learn more. This plan was designed with a rate lock for people on a fixed income who want life insurance that fits their budget and is simple to get. Coverage options start at $9.95 a month, less than 35 cents a day. Act now, and your rate will be locked in for life. It will never increase, guaranteed. This is lifelong coverage that can never be canceled as long as you pay your premiums, guaranteed. And your acceptance is guaranteed, with no health questions. You cannot be turned down because of your health. Call for your information kit and read about this rate lock for yourself. You'll also get a free beneficiary planner. Both are free with no obligation. Don't miss out. Call for information, then decide. Read about the 30-day 100% money-back guarantee. Don't wait. Call this number now.
Call now and you will also get this free beneficiary planner. Use this valuable guide to record important information and your final wishes, and it's yours free just for calling. So don't wait. Call 1-800-357-4821 for your free information. That's 1-800-357-4821. There's no risk or obligation. That number again is 1-800-357-4821. That's 1-800-357-4821. 1-800-357-4821. Call now.
When I drink it, the first thing was it from the opposite slope, says Islambeck Altumashev, an engineer with a local radiology lab. The area near the town of Malaisu was one of the world's biggest uranium ore dumps. developed by the Soviet Union between the 1940s and 60s. The dams currently hold about 185 million gallons of tailings, or about 280 Olympic-sized swimming pools. A landslide in 2017 made the dams unstable. Another one, or an earthquake, could spell disaster. If the dams give way, contaminated water could flow into the river and into the Fergana Valley. It stretches across areas in Kyrgyzstan, Uzbekistan, and Tajikistan, home to about 16 million people, many of whom cultivate various crops. Studies at a Soviet-era radioactive waste disposal facility suggest millions of people could be displaced in the event of a disaster. The studies are part of a project by the European Commission and European Bank for Reconstruction and Development. They show the waste cannot be safely contained where it is and has got to be moved away from the river's banks.
Within the framework of this project, 16 tailing dumps are supposed to be recultivated. 4 of the tailing dumps are going to be moved to safe locations.
It could cost over $26 million to move the waste from 2 unsafe locations to one further away from the river. At his Kyrgyzstan orchard, resident Tokhtobek Berdy Bekov says that can't happen soon enough. The most important thing is for us to get rid of the tailing dump, the one over the corner. It is dangerous, without any doubt, he says.
Next, a high-profile repatriation of artifacts in the UK. 4 Aboriginal spears brought to the country by Captain James Cook more than 250 years ago were returned to the Australian Indigenous community. Take a look at the ceremony held at Cambridge University.
4 spears taken from an Aboriginal community by a British explorer over 250 years ago were returned on Tuesday. The University of Cambridge handed them over in a ceremony to descendants of the Indigenous community in Australia, which crafted them. It marks the latest high-profile repatriation of artefacts. The 4 spears are all that remain of the roughly 40 which James Cook and his team took from the Gweagal people on their arrival in Australia in 1770. They became the first known Europeans to reach the country's east coast. The Gweagal people's multi-pronged wooden spears were given to the university's Trinity College in 1771.
Instead of conflict, we have a partnership, and instead of a misunderstanding, we have a shared vision. Today, we have an opportunity to celebrate these spears and what they represent for us, Australia, and the whole world.
The return comes 7 years after an initial request was refused, partly over concerns about housing and conserving the spears. Indigenous people around the globe have battled to recover works pillaged by explorers and colonisers. In recent years, some have finally received treasures back, including Nigeria receiving the Benin bronzes, as Western institutions grapple with the cultural legacies of empire.
5 new airport employees are roaming the terminals at one of the world's busiest transportation hubs. Their job is to provide a stress-free travel experience for anxious passengers.